Darktide is a deceptively in-depth experience that will demand teamwork and mechanical prowess in order to make it through the gauntlet of heretical lowlives and infested scum of Tertium. Now in this video I'll aim to make your chance of survival that little bit higher, and maybe, just maybe, you can go from prisoner reject to dispensing the beneficent Emperor's wrath in no time at all. Remember to like this video to support the channel if you get something useful from watching, and subscribe for more guides like these. I'm Duck, and this is your Ducking Good Guide to Warhammer 40K Darktide. So, first things first, let's talk about the Mourningstar. This is your hub in which you'll be able to do everything from test weaponry, learn enemy types, upgrade your equipment, and check on tasks you have for the week. For anyone that already feels comfortable with the Mourningstar and everything it has to offer, I've left some timestamps in this video so you can go ahead and skip to the next section. Now, we'll go through each area of the Mourningstar from right to left. Furthest to the right you'll have the Psykhanium, where you can test weapons and learn more about the opponents you'll face. I'll go into a bit more detail on this later, as it can be a lot more useful than you might first think. Next is the Tech Priest Workshop, allowing you to modify your weaponry. Just across the hall from that is the Armory, allowing you to buy weapons of varying rarities with limited stock numbers, or any weapon you like at the lowest rarity to upgrade yourself. Further across in the central corridor is Sire Melk, who will have a list of weekly tasks for you, which rewards some currency you can use on a rotating selection of special items, or try your luck on a random roll for less currency. Next up is Hallowette, which is basically your premium currency store where you can buy cosmetics. And further to the left of all the vendors, you can check up on cosmetics you can buy with the in-game currency you'll earn, known as Ordo Dockets. Finally, the Barber is across the hall from that, and he will allow you to alter the appearance for your character to a certain degree. Okay, so that's a basic overview of the Mourningstar. We'll go into a little bit more detail on a couple of these things these vendors offer later on. But first, let's get into some combat tips so that you're ready to get out there and purge some heretics. Now, the first and most important thing to understand about playing Darktide is that teamwork and cooperation really does matter. In Darktide, almost every class will come with bonuses to allies and yourself when you are in what's called coherency. An ally is in coherency with you when they are close to you, so sticking together can provide you with bonuses to things like your toughness regeneration rate, attack speed, and even output damage done, depending on which talents you and your team have chosen. Aside from all that, going off alone leaves you at risk of being tangled up by a specialist enemy like the Trapper or a Hound, and your team will have to come and save you. Exploring the map for plasteel and diamantine can be a good idea, as you'll be thanking yourself later when you start using these crafting supplies to change or upgrade weaponry. You won't be doing this too much as you're leveling. In fact, I'd actually advise against it because you'll be replacing weapons so frequently, but you'll definitely need them later. That said, you don't want to go off on your own, so make sure you're bringing someone with you, or you're not straying too far before you return to the group, especially as you're learning the game. Survival is more important than gathering some extra supplies. Whichever class you decide to play in Darktide, you'll need to know how to properly avoid damage. It's going to be overwhelming at first, dealing with the sheer number of enemies that will wash over you and your team, but you'll soon find your feet once you learn about incoming alerts and dodging. The most effective way to avoid taking direct damage in Darktide is to dodge. Pressing space by default will perform a dodge in the direction you're currently moving and avoid incoming attacks, both melee and ranged. Whilst you're hacking away at heretics with your blessed armaments of choice, remember to mix in dodges frequently. You won't have to spam them, but dodging often is going to ensure that you're not overwhelmed. Now, there's two alert sounds in Darktide that will notify you of an incoming attack. This sound signifies an incoming melee attack, and this sound signifies an incoming ranged attack. It'll be tricky at first, but get into the habit of dodging whenever you hear this sound. This is how experienced players are able to dance around in melee combat without taking damage, despite looking like they're surrounded. Dodges are always more effective than a block, especially when it comes to larger, hard-hitting enemies like crushers or maulers. These enemies' attacks should be avoided at all costs, as they can easily chunk down your health by massive amounts in a single strike. It's also important to note that the distance of your dodge is affected by the mobility stat of the weapon you are currently using. Weapons like pistols tend to have higher mobility and will allow you to dodge further, whereas heavier weapons will have lower mobility and thus will cut down your dodge distance. There is also a dodge limit, which again is dependent on your weapon of choice. This is why I mentioned earlier that it's important not to just spam your dodge key. You'll want to know how many dodges you can use in a row before hitting your limit. Once you hit your limit, you'll slow down considerably and your dodges will not be as effective. By leaving small breaks between them to attack, you'll be able to extend the lifetime of your effective dodging. Okay, now that you've mastered dodging, which is by far the most important component of combat in my opinion, we'll talk about some of the other offensive and defensive options you'll have. Every melee weapon in Darktide will come with a light attack, a heavy attack, a block, an alternate attack, a push, and a push stab. That might sound like a lot if you're a beginner, but understanding each of these attacks and when you should use them against different enemies is a game changer that will drastically increase your performance in game. For example, most melee light attacks are a quick way to land multiple hits, sometimes with some cleave against multiple targets. Heavy attacks, on the other hand, for some weapons will have heavy amounts of cleave damage in one swing. Some weapons, like the combat axe, will instead have a big chunk of armor penetration with their heavy attack. As a final example, the thunder hammer can perform knockdowns with its heavy attack on several targets. Your alternate attack can sometimes give you a quick attack to mix in with your regular attacks, or with weapons like the chainsword, it will charge up an attack that can do massive amounts of damage to a single target and stun lock unarmored opponents. This is perfect for dealing with enemies like ragers, who can be a pain to fight in melee combat otherwise. You should already be able to see how using these different attacks for different enemies can be crucial, so take some time to learn how each weapon operates with all of its attacks, not just the basic light and heavy moves. Holding mouse 2 is going to perform a block, and whilst blocking you can left click to push enemies away if they are starting to overwhelm you, or you can hold down your left click to perform a push stab that will keep up your guard whilst landing an attack at the same time, but it will consume stamina to do so. You can practice all these things in the Psykhanium to better understand how they work for your weapon. Just as a tip that you'll get plenty of use from, you can actually push away hounds when they try to leap on you, and you can do the same to poxbursters before dodging backwards to avoid taking damage from their explosion entirely. Now, when you dive into your first missions, I'd suggest starting on the second difficulty known as Uprising. This is going to offer you a good middle ground in terms of challenge when you first get started. You'll likely find as your equipment improves and you gain more levels that you're able to step up the difficulty, but for now it's a good place to learn the ropes, and you can always drop it down one more difficulty level if you're struggling. Remember, for now, you're just looking to find your feet. You don't have to be a professional right away. It's no fun for anyone if you're getting stomped on every mission that you take on. Things can get pretty hectic in Darktide, and you'll often be having those sweaty palm moments where you feel like you're fighting for your life, so you'd be forgiven for not spotting a high priority target through the hail of lasgun fire or the purging fire of a flamethrower. This is where pressing Q becomes so important. This, quite simply, marks an enemy target. So many players consider this feature not even worth using, but the truth of the matter is often in the heat of battle, a dangerous enemy will slip through the net without being spotted. By pressing Q regularly, even if you can't really see much yourself, you can mark important targets for your team, and it's the quickest way to draw their attention to a threat. Not to mention that some missions have a reduced visibility modifier, and this feature is going to be a godsend in that situation too. As a side note, if you decide to go veteran as your class of choice, this is even more important, as there's a decent chance later down the line you'll take some talents that increase damage to marked targets. Alright, remember earlier when I said the Psykhanium will be more useful than you might first think? Well, let's get into that now. Every single enemy in Darktide has certain characteristics that identify what kind of enemy they are. Some weapons will have stats like more damage to unyielding enemies, for example. In the Psykhanium, you can review these enemy types and all their characteristics in a controlled environment. This is going to be crucial to how you decide to build your class with the use of your talent tree and how you set up your weapon stats. As an example, Ragers, Ogrin enemies, and Monstrosities, those are the mini-bosses that you'll fight in missions, are all classified as unyielding enemies. They may also have carapace or flak armor. The choice is yours in terms of what you decide to focus on, but it's important to understand the fundamentals for later when you start changing your gear around. The Psykhanium also offers you the chance to test various weapons and abilities against different enemies to see how well they will perform. Speaking of weapons, make sure to try multiple combinations of weaponry and talents. Everyone has their favorite, and you're only going to find it by trying stuff out. In the early stages of the game, as you're leveling, is the best time to do this, because you're going to be finding your equipment is being replaced by higher level drops anyway on quite a regular basis, and you won't need to spend tons of resources upgrading and refining your weapons at lower levels like you will when you reach level 30. There are a bunch of weapons that are shared across many of the classes, as well as some unique options for each class too. One of Darktide's strongest points of all is the diversity of weapons available to you. Some are focused more on taking out heavily armored targets, others might be focused more on cleave damage for clearing waves of chaff units. Again, everyone is different, and you'll find something to suit you only by mixing stuff up and trying different things. The same thing can be said for the classes available in Darktide too. Each of them have an entirely different playstyle, some multiple playstyles, based on how you build your talents. Talents and building your character is something I'll focus on in another video, because honestly, we could be here all day covering different variations. For a beginner, just know that you can change your talents freely at any time with no penalties, so you can try different builds, and that you can benefit from trying each class to see which one you enjoy most. Alright, now let's quickly touch on bonus objectives. Every so often you'll also find that a mission will give you a secondary objective to acquire scriptures or grimoires. Finding these items will give you extra XP and Ordo dockets for each one you can find. Both of these two bonus objectives can be found lurking in corners and areas off the beaten path. So just like when you're looking for supplies, you'll want to try and bring a friend to look with them to make sure you're not going to get pounced when you're isolated. Scriptures will make a faint whispering sound when you're close to them, which sounds a little bit like this. Scriptures? Grimoires, on the other hand, will glow a vibrant green, so they're quite easy to spot when you find one. Scriptures will take up the same space on your character that would allow for you to carry an ammo crate or a medipack, so keep that in mind. Grimoires will do the same, but they will also corrupt you and remove a portion of your maximum health. As a side note here, curios that you equip can come with corruption resistance, or specifically grimoire corruption resistance at a higher amount. Having at least one of these stats on one of your curios can be an incredibly useful asset for these missions. Now, bonus objectives are fantastic, but what's going to be an even better way for you to level up quickly is using the quick play feature when selecting a mission. This is going to give you a 20% bonus to experience gained from the mission and a 10% bonus to any and all resources you collect on the mission. Quite often you'll find that the missions will come with optional objectives anyway, in which case you'll be gaining the percentage increase on the XP gained from those objectives as well, so it's always going to be the faster way to get experience points. This method of play will also force you into playing some missions with modifiers, and it's going to be important to learn how those work as you're progressing through the levels. Now, when you're in a mission, you can hold tab at any time to check the modifier that's currently active to gain a better understanding of how it works. Last but not least, let's teach you a little bit about weapon rarities and upgrading. Each weapon has 5 rarity tiers. There's a diagram on screen now with the names and color of each tier in ascending order, but if you've played any MMOs in the past, you're probably familiar with this already. Each tier advanced offers a new perk to the weapon or a new blessing. You can change or upgrade a maximum of 2 of these blessings or perks. Once you've changed them, there's no going back. If you're looking for a specific weapon to upgrade or try, you can use Brunt's Armory to buy a profane weapon that you can upgrade yourself, or you can buy one at a higher rarity, but the selection will be limited. We won't worry about the best optimizations in this video, but it's important for you to understand the basics as you're leveling up so that you can build on this knowledge once you reach level 30 and start going for the best weapons available to you. So, that's your Ducking Good Beginner's Guide to Warhammer 40K Darktide. Again, if you found this video useful, you'd be doing me a huge favor by dropping the video a like and subscribing to show that you're interested in more Darktide videos just like this one. I'm hoping to make a selection of guides from how to play each class with some different builds, and do some stuff like learning about the weapon modification system in more detail, and perhaps even my tips for Auric level missions too for level 30 players. So yeah, if you're interested in that, you know what to do. Lastly, if I've missed anything in this video that you feel would be helpful for beginners, please do feel free to drop them in the comments section below. I want to turn this video into a place to share information that can be helpful for new players, and I've no doubt that there's some stuff out there that you could share to help someone out. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back with more Ducking Good guides.